One autumn evening, when the air carried the crisp bite of fallen leaves and the sky was a bruised shade of violet, a stranger entered the village. He was an old traveler, his cloak dusty from roads that seemed to have no beginning and no end, his boots worn soft as old leather. His face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that come not from age alone, but from years of watching sunrises in places with no names. His eyes were deep and calm, like still water that had learned never to be disturbed by passing wind. He walked slowly, not with the hesitation of the lost, but with the deliberate pace of someone who knows that every step is a conversation with the earth. The traveler stopped at the well in the village square, drank deeply, and then asked a young girl who was drawing water, "I have crossed 7 lands, child, and in each one I have heard whispers of a light so beautiful that even the stars grow jealous. They told me it comes from a workshop in this very village. Can you take me there?" The girl, whose name was Lila, smiled and pointed to a crooked little building at the edge of the lane, where smoke curled lazily from a chimney, and a single lantern hung above the door, already lit against the gathering dusk. The traveler thanked her, adjusted the strap of his worn satchel, and made his way toward the workshop, his heart light with curiosity. Inside, Elias was putting away his tools. The day had been a long one, filled with the small frustrations that accumulate like sawdust. A hinge that wouldn't sit right, a batch of oil that burned too smokily, a design that refused to match the image in his mind. He was tired in the way that goes deeper than muscles, a weariness of the spirit that had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. When the traveler's silhouette filled the doorway, Elias looked up with the guarded expression of a man who does not expect good news. "The workshop is closed," Elias said, his voice flat. "Come back tomorrow if you need a lantern." The traveler did not move. He stood there, his calm eyes taking in the cluttered benches, the rows of lanterns hanging like sleeping birds from the rafters, the faint haze of smoke that made the air seem almost sacred. "I have not come to buy a lantern," he said, his voice as gentle as a stream over smooth stones. "I have crossed 7 lands, Maker, and I have heard of a light so beautiful that even the stars grow jealous. They told me it comes from this very workshop." Elias gave a sad, tired smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Then the stars must be disappointed tonight," he said. "I have nothing worth crossing 7 lands for. You've wasted your journey." The traveler stepped further into the room, his presence unhurried and peaceful. He looked at the lantern that hung just above Elias's head, one that Elias had lit only because the evening was growing dark, and he could not bear to work in total blackness. It was a simple lantern, unadorned, its brass a little tarnished from years of hanging in the same spot. The flame inside it was steady, a small, determined tongue of gold that pushed gently against the glass. The traveler gazed at it for a long moment, then turned back to Elias. "What do you see when you look at this lantern, Maker?" Elias barely glanced at it. He had seen it 1,000 times, and 1,000 times he had found it wanting. "I see a wick that is slightly crooked," he recited, as if reading from a list he knew by heart. "I see brass that is a little too pale. I see glass that is uneven, a few bubbles trapped inside that I couldn't work out. I see a flame that flickers more than it should, as if it isn't sure of itself. I see a lantern that tries but fails." He paused, and his voice dropped to something quieter, more fragile. I see myself." The traveler remained silent for a moment, letting the words hang in the smoky air. Then he asked softly, "And what do you feel?" The question caught Elias off guard. He was not a man accustomed to speaking about feeling. His life had been shaped by the language of tools and measurements, by the precise angles of metal and the chemistry of flame. Feelings belonged to poets and children, not to lantern makers who carried the weight of a family name. But something in the traveler's voice, a gentleness that did not demand, only invited, unlocked a door deep inside him. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses and the small scars, and whispered, "I feel like this lantern. I try, but I fail. Every day I work until my back aches and my eyes burn. And every night, I think my father's spirit watches me and shakes its head. I have given my entire life to light, but I cannot see it. I only see the flaws, the mistakes, the ways I am not enough." The traveler nodded slowly, as if he had heard these words before, in different mouths, in different lands. He pulled a wooden stool from the corner, sat down with the careful weight of an old man, and gestured for Elias to sit as well. "Then let me tell you a story, maker of light," he said. "It is a story I heard many years ago, in a valley that lay hidden beneath an eternal fog. Perhaps it will mean something to you." Elias hesitated, then sat on the edge of his workbench, his hands folded in his lap like a schoolboy waiting for a lesson. "Far away," the traveler began, "there was a valley where the sun never shone. A thick gray fog covered it always, so dense that the people there had never seen the blue of the sky or the sharp edges of their own shadows. They lived in a world of soft outlines and muted colors, and they had learned to accept it. In that valley lived a young painter named Anara. She mixed her colors, from crushed stones, from wild berries, from the rust she scraped off old iron, and from the petals of flowers that grew stubbornly in the dimness. Her paintings, the villagers said, were the only things in the valley that seemed to carry light within them. When they looked at her work, they would swear they could feel warmth on their skin, as if the fog itself wept with color. But Anara, the painter, was filled with a sadness she could not name. Every time she finished a painting, she would stand back, tilt her head and see only gray. Where others saw a blazing sunset she had imagined onto the canvas, she saw only a clumsy smear. Where others saw the deep, tender green of a forest she had dreamed into being, she saw only a muddy stain. She believed her hands were broken, that her gift was a lie whispered to her by a foolish hope. The traveler paused, allowing the image to settle. Elias found himself leaning forward, his own breath shallow. One day, the traveler continued, a mirror maker wandered into that valley. He was a quiet man who carried a strange glass on his back. A mirror which the people of the fog-veiled valley had never seen. He set up his stall in the village square, and curious people gathered. He showed a farmer his own reflection, and the farmer wept, because he had never known the shape of his own face. He showed a mother her reflection, and she laughed and touched her cheeks, as if discovering a treasure. Then he showed Anara, the painter, her own reflection. She saw her own eyes for the first time. Tired, yes, but with a deep smoldering intensity. She saw the paint stains on her cheeks, the stray streak of blue in her hair, and behind her, the mirror caught the edge of a painting she had finished just that morning and propped against the wall. She turned around, And through the mirror, she looked at that painting, and she gasped. The colors were magnificent. Deep violet, like the heart of a storm. Burning orange, like a memory of a sun she had never seen. Green, like new leaves pushing through the soil of her imagination. It was beautiful, alive, full of a light she had not believed existed. She began to cry, her tears cutting tracks through the paint on her face. "Why?" she asked the mirror maker. "Could I not see this before? I have looked at this painting 100 times and seen only failure." The mirror maker smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Because you were looking at your own painting with your own tired eyes," he said. "You were looking through the fog of your fear, through the gray glass of your doubt. Sometimes we need a clean mirror or another's eyes to see the beauty we make every day." The traveler's voice faded into silence. In the workshop, the only sound was the soft hiss of the lantern above them and the distant murmur of the river. Elias was perfectly still, except for a small tremble in his fingers. He felt as though the traveler's words had reached into his chest and gently turned. A key he had forgotten existed. "Your lanterns are not dull, Elias," the traveler said, his voice low and steady. "You are simply measuring your own light with a ruler carved from your deepest doubts. You see the crooked wick because you fear you are crooked inside. You see pale brass because you believe your passion has faded. You see uneven glass because you have spent so many years looking for cracks in yourself. But the world outside this workshop, the villagers who pause their walks to stand in the warmth of your lanterns, the children who watch the golden glow on rainy nights, this tired old traveler who crossed 7 lands, we see something else entirely." Elias lifted his eyes, and for the first time, they were wet. "What do you see?" he whispered. "I see a flame that does not flicker because it is weak," the traveler said. "It flickers because it is alive. I see a light that holds the darkness gently, like a mother holding a sleepless child. I see a maker who has poured his soul into every piece of brass and glass, and who has forgotten that a lantern does not need to see its own flame. It simply shines and lets the darkness know its name." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The silence that filled the workshop was not empty. It was thick with the weight of understanding. The kind of silence that follows a truth too large to be answered quickly. Elias sat on his workbench, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes had changed. They were no longer the eyes of a man looking inward at his own flaws, but the eyes of someone who had just been handed a mirror and was terrified and hopeful. In equal measure about what he might see, the traveler rose slowly from his stool, his old joints creaking in gentle protest. "You have given your life to light, Elias," he said, "but you forgot one thing. A lantern does not judge its own glow. It simply burns. And in burning, it becomes a small sun for someone lost in the dark. You have been waiting for your own eyes to approve of you, for your own heart to finally say, yes, this is good enough. But maybe, Maker, your eyes are not the ones that need convincing." Elias swallowed hard. "Then whose eyes?" he asked. The traveler smiled, a slow, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his calm eyes. "The eyes of the world you light. The eyes of the farmer who finds his way home after a long day because your lantern hangs by his gate. The eyes of the young woman who reads poetry by your flame and feels less alone. The eyes of a child who is afraid of the dark until your light shows her that darkness is nothing but a canvas waiting for a spark. And perhaps one day your own eyes, when you learn to look at your work the way the river looks at the sky, without judgment, only reflection. That night Elias did not sleep. The traveler had accepted a small meal from the village innkeeper and had retired to a modest room. But Elias found himself unable to rest. He walked through the village, barefoot on the cool, dew-dampened earth, and he looked at the lanterns hanging outside every home. This time, he did not look at the wicks or the brass or the glass. He did not search for imperfections, for signs of his own inadequacy. Instead, he looked at the light. He looked at the way it pooled on the cobblestones like liquid honey. He looked at the way it reached out and touched the leaves of the old banyan tree in the village square, turning them into shimmering emeralds against the ink-black sky. He looked at the way it held the darkness gently, not fighting it, but dancing with it, creating a world of soft shadows and warm edges that felt somehow like a promise. He stopped in front of the house of an old widow named Mira, who had once told him that his lantern helped her feel as though her late husband was still sitting beside her in the evenings. He had dismissed her words at the time as kindness, as politeness, as the sweet lies people tell to spare a craftsman's feelings. Now, standing in the quiet night, he let her words return to him, and he let himself believe them just a little. He let himself imagine that his light was doing something real, something important, something that had nothing to do with straight wicks or perfect brass. He walked until his feet were sore, and the first pale hint of dawn began to bleed into the eastern sky. Then he returned to his workshop, but this time he did something he had never done before. He lit every single lantern in the room, the ones that were finished and polished, the ones that were still rough and unready, the ones he had hidden in dusty corners, because he was ashamed of their crooked handles and uneven seams. He lit them all one by one, until the workshop was no longer a place of work but a cathedral of flame. Hundreds of tiny fires, each one a small, brave declaration against the dark. Then he sat down on the wooden floor in the center of that dancing ocean of light, closed his eyes, and just felt. He felt the warmth on his skin, the gentle heat on his eyelids, the way the combined glow of all those imperfect lanterns turned the inside of the workshop into a sunrise. And for the first time in decades, he whispered to himself out loud, his voice trembling with the effort of belief, "I am enough. My light is real, and I don't need to see it to believe it." The words hung in the air, fragile and fierce. He said them again, louder this time, until they filled the room and echoed back to him from the rafters, carried by the warmth of 100 small flames. The next morning the traveler prepared to leave. He stood at the edge of the village, his satchel slung over his shoulder, his old boots ready for the next road. The sun had risen fully now, turning the sky into a canvas of soft gold and pale blue. Elias came running, his face different, lighter, younger, as if a great stone had been rolled away from his heart. He was carrying a lantern, the finest he could find, its brass polished to a soft gleam, its glass clear and unblemished. "Please," Elias said, breathless from running, "I want to give you this, the finest lantern I have ever made. It is not much, but it is all I have to offer my gratitude." The traveler looked at the lantern and then at Elias's face. He shook his head, smiling. "You already gave me the finest lantern you have ever made," he said. "Last night, you just didn't see it. You hung it outside my window because I was a guest in this village, and you thought it was ordinary. But that lantern maker guided my dreams through the night. Its light is still inside my eyelids even now, even in the morning sun." Elias bowed his head, not in shame this time, but in humble gratitude. "Then how do I thank you?" he asked. The traveler placed a gentle hand on Elias's shoulder. "Keep making light," he said, "and remember that every lantern you make is a message to someone lost in the dark. Even if the messenger does not understand the words, the message still saves. You do not need to be perfect, Elias. You only need to keep burning." With that, the traveler turned and walked away, his figure growing smaller and smaller against the vast tapestry of the rising sun, until he was just a speck on the road and then nothing at all. Elias stood there for a long time, watching the empty road, the lantern still in his hands. Then he turned and walked back to his workshop, his steps lighter than they had been in years. From that day on, something shifted in the heart of the lantern maker. He still worked with the same careful hands, the same devotion to his craft, but the reason behind the work had transformed. He no longer made lanterns to prove his worth, to chase the ghost of his father's approval, to fill the hollow voice inside that whispered of inadequacy. He made them because he understood. Now that light, real light, is never about perfection. It is about showing up in the dark again and again, and daring to glow even when you cannot see the difference you're making. He understood that a lantern's purpose is not to be admired by its maker, but to be a companion to the lost, a comfort to the lonely, a small, stubborn announcement that the darkness does not have the final word. He began to talk to his lanterns as he worked, a quiet habit that would have embarrassed him in earlier years. "You are enough," he would whisper to a half-finished brass frame. "You will shine. I believe in you." And slowly, he began to believe the same thing about himself. Years passed. The seasons cycled through the village. Springs of wildflowers and green mist, summers of thick golden afternoons, autumns of crisp air and falling leaves, winters of quiet snow that blanketed the roofs and turned the lantern light into something magical. Elias grew old. His hair turned white. His hands began to shake like leaves in a late autumn wind, and his back curved gently with the weight of decades spent leaning over his workbench. But his eyes, those tired eyes that had once seen only flaws, now held a deep, calm warmth that reminded the villagers of the lanterns themselves. One evening, a young woman from the village, Lila, the same girl who had pointed the traveler to Elias's workshop all those years ago, now grown into a thoughtful and kind-hearted presence, came to visit him. She often came to watch him work, fascinated by the slow, deliberate dance of his hands. That evening, as the sun set and the first stars began to prick the velvet sky, she asked him, "Grandfather Elias, what is the secret to making a lantern that shines so beautifully? Everyone says your light is the warmest in the whole valley. There must be a secret." Elias set down his tools and looked at her with a tender smile. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and slow, like honey pouring from a jar. "The secret," child," he said, "is to stop asking if your flame is bright enough. A candle does not ask the sun for permission to burn. It does not compare itself to the great fires of the world. It just burns, and in doing so, it becomes the sun for someone lost in the dark. You see, for so many years, I wanted my lanterns to be perfect. I wanted them to be flawless, to be worthy of my Father's name, to silence the voice inside me that said I was not enough. But perfection is not what light is about. Light is about presence. It is about saying, I am here and I will stay with you until the dawn comes. He picked up a small, simple lantern, one he had been working on that very afternoon, and lit it. The flame sputtered for a moment, then steadied into a warm, golden glow. He held it out to Lila. "This lantern," he said, "is not perfect. The glass has tiny bubbles. The wick is a little uneven. But if you hang it outside your window tonight, it will keep the darkness company. And that, dear child, is enough. That is always enough." Lila took the lantern, her eyes bright with something that was not just the reflection of the flame. She looked at Elias's wrinkled face, at the soft, steady smile that seemed to glow from somewhere deep within him. And she understood. The old lantern maker had finally become his own light. Not because he had made the perfect lantern, but because he had learned to see the perfection in simply burning, simply being, simply showing up with his flawed, beautiful human light. And so, the story of Elias, the lantern maker who could not see his own light, became a quiet legend in that village. Not a grand legend of heroes and battles, but a gentle one, told by mothers to their children on nights when the stars hid behind clouds. It was the story of a man who spent his whole life believing he was lost in the dark, only to discover that he had been the light all along, shining for everyone but himself. And when he finally let his own flame warm him, the whole world grew a little brighter. In the years that followed, whenever someone in the village felt that their own efforts were invisible, that their contributions were too small to matter, someone would say, "Remember old Elias. Remember the lantern maker who couldn't see his own light. He taught us that you don't need to see your own flame to be a light for someone else. You just need to keep burning." And that simple truth, passed from mouth to mouth, became a gift greater than any lantern ever made. A light that never went out. In a village cradled between a whispering river and a quiet, silver-green mountain, there lived a man named Elias. He was a lantern maker, just as his father had been and his grandfather before him. The workshop where he spent his days smelled of oil, brass, old wood, and the faint ghost of beeswax, a scent that had wrapped around his childhood like a well-worn blanket, heavy with memory and silent expectation. The villagers, who saw him bent over his bench from dawn until the last light bled out of the sky, called him the man who paints with fire. It was a name spoken with affection, sometimes with awe, because when Elias lit his lanterns, their glow seemed to dance. Not in the frantic way of ordinary flames, but with a slow, breathing warmth, golden and steady, as if each tiny fire carried its own soul. But Elias had a secret he guarded more fiercely than his father's old tools. He could not see his own light. Every evening, after the work was done, he would step out of the workshop door, his hands smelling of metal and kerosene, and look at the lanterns hanging by the doors of his neighbors. Their glow struck him as honest, comforting, complete. Yet when his gaze fell upon his own, creations. The ones he had shaped with aching patience, the ones whose brass edges he had smoothed until his fingers bled. He felt only a hollow ache spreading beneath his ribs. To his eyes, his lanterns seemed dull, ordinary, somehow lacking the quiet magic others claimed to see. He would tilt his head, squint, hold the lantern closer, and always find the same list of faults. A flame that flickered too nervously, a glass pane that was slightly thicker on one side, a wick that refused to stand perfectly straight. Maybe they're just being kind, he would murmur to himself, rubbing his tired hands together. Maybe I am only a shadow of my father, and everyone is too polite to say so. His father, Marcus, had been a master whose lanterns were said to hold light, so pure that even the moon would pause to admire them. Marcus had died when Elias was 22, leaving behind a workshop full of half-finished dreams and the unspoken weight of a name that felt too large for his son's shoulders. In the years since, Elias had worked with an intensity that bordered on devotion, but the ghost of his father's reputation sat on the workbench every morning like a silent critic, and no amount of polishing or perfecting could make it disappear. The more he strived, the less he trusted the flicker in the glass.